My husband said he needed space. A week later, I found out he filed for divorce, flew to Lanai Island with his affair partner, and live-streamed their kiss with a caption that said, "Finally free." He tagged my name. Everyone saw it before I even opened the app. I didn't scream, I didn't ask why. Instead, I met the woman he lied to before me. We sat at my kitchen table, pulled out every receipt, tracked every stolen dollar, and watched as the life he built on betrayal started to collapse. My name is Jessica. I don't destroy people, I just stop protecting them. For as long as I could remember, I had been the kind of woman who kept things in balance. Numbers, people, emotions. I believed that if you worked hard, stayed grounded, and chose stability over chaos, life would reward you with peace. For a while, I thought it had. My name is Jessica Alden. I'm 38, a financial executive at ArcLight Finance in San Diego. I've spent the last 15 years of my life working my way up from analyst to vice president. I live by routines, swear by spreadsheets, and still bring my lunch in a glass container like my mother taught me. Until recently, I was married to Rob Alden. 42, tall, well-groomed, smooth with words. He worked as a marketing director at Nova Health. He was good at reading people, knowing what to say, when to say it, and how to make you feel like you were the only person in the room. That skill had served him well in both business and other areas I would later find out. When people asked about us, I used to say we were solid, not flashy, not dramatic. Just two people who understood the value of a quiet evening, good wine, and long conversations about nothing. For our 10th anniversary, we didn't throw a party or take a cruise. We stayed home, ordered Thai, and rewatched a movie we had seen on our third date. That was our rhythm. Comfortable. Familiar. The first shift came 6 months ago at a Nova Health mixer on a Thursday evening. The event was held at a rooftop bar downtown. Sunset Open Bar, a skyline view. It was the kind of setting where everyone looked like their LinkedIn profile photo, just more filtered. Rob was in his element, introducing me to a carousel of people. At some point, he placed a hand on my lower back and said, "Jess, you've got to meet Vanessa. She's the one I told you about." I turned to see a woman in a deep green silk blouse and tailored black pants. Vanessa Lee. I knew the name before she even spoke. Her face had only grown sharper since the last time I saw her back in 2020 at the Denver Health Innovation Summit. Back then, she and I had presented competing financial models for a public health merger. I won the contract. She came in second but made sure the panel remembered her. Especially with that one line. Some models look good in spreadsheets but collapse in real life, delivered with a pointed glance in my direction. Now she was smiling at me, hand extended. Finally, the famous Jessica. I've heard so much. I shook her hand. Firm grip. Nails perfectly manicured. Her perfume was expensive and understated. I smiled, said something polite. But something inside me stiffened. Rob was beaming. Vanessa's been incredible. Leading the telehealth initiative. Honestly, don't know what we'd do without her. Vanessa laughed. Oh, please. He's just saying that because I haven't sent in my PTO request yet. They both chuckled. I noticed the way she looked at him, unapologetically direct, and how he didn't flinch. My stomach tightened for half a second. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Later that night, after we got home, I asked Rob casually if he worked with her often. Not directly, he said, kicking off his shoes. But we're on overlapping teams for some projects. Why? Just curious, I replied. We brushed our teeth in silence. I watched his reflection in the mirror, trying to read something in the lines of his face. Nothing looked different. That bothered me more than I could explain. 3 weeks later, I found him in the kitchen after midnight. The light over the stove was on, casting a yellow hue across the counters. He was standing in sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, hunched over his phone, thumbs scrolling quickly. He didn't hear me come in. I said his name softly. He looked up, startled, then smiled. Couldn't sleep, huh? Number, you just catching up on emails. Crazy day. He tapped the side button and placed the phone face down on the island. Too smooth, too rehearsed. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. We stood in silence. He looked relaxed. Too relaxed. My gut whispered something again, but I silenced it. The next morning, I didn't mention it. Maybe it really had been work. Maybe he didn't want to wake me. Maybe placing your phone face down didn't mean anything at all. But something had shifted. I could feel it. He started working later, traveling more, coming home distracted. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Q3 was always rough in his industry. But then he stopped telling me when he was traveling until the night before. He brushed off questions with jokes. "You sound like my manager, Jess." Relax. I did relax, or at least I tried to. But at night when he turned away in bed and the silence felt too heavy, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering when my peaceful, balanced life had become so full of noise. I was making coffee when the message came in. It was from Rachel, one of my old colleagues at ArcLight who had moved to Dallas the year before. "Have you seen the live stream?" No context. No follow-up. Just that one sentence. I frowned and set my mug down my thumb, hovering over the screen. "What live stream?" I typed back. A second later, 3 dots appeared. Then a link. I clicked it thinking maybe it was something work-related or a funny video Rachel wanted to share. But the moment the page loaded, my chest constricted. It was Rob and Vanessa. They were sitting on a shaded patio that overlooked the ocean, the wind lightly blowing through palm trees behind them. Vanessa was wearing a white linen dress, her legs curled beneath her, and Rob had his arm around her shoulders like they had done this 100 times before. The livestream title read, "Weekend in Lanai with my person." But it was the caption that made my stomach drop. "Finally free with the love of my life." They were laughing, drinking from coconut glasses. Rob kissed her on the temple mid-sentence. The kind of casual, familiar affection you only show someone you feel completely safe with. Someone you've done this with before. I felt frozen. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I might pass out. My ears rang and my vision blurred at the edges. Then I saw it. My name. In the tags. Jessica Alden. He had tagged me. As if I were some passive observer. As if I would see it and clap politely from the sidelines. The comments were pouring in. "Omen, you two are adorable." Finally, Rob found happiness. "She's stunning. You guys glow." And in the sea of emojis and hearts and congratulations, not a single person mentioned me. Not one person asked what happened to his wife, our 10 years, our house, our life. I closed the app and just stood there in the kitchen, phone still in hand, the coffee growing cold beside me. I must have stood like that for a long time because the next thing I remember was the sun shifting through the blinds and casting long bars of light on the floor. I sat down slowly at the kitchen island and watched the dust move through the air. I thought about calling someone. My sister, maybe. Or my friend Beth in Chicago. But every name I scrolled through felt wrong. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want explanations. I wanted it to not be real. I opened Facebook again, convincing myself I had imagined the tag. But it was still there. Worse, the view count had jumped. Over 400 people had seen the live stream in under an hour. Some of them had shared it. A few mutual friends had commented with inside jokes like, "Looks like that Maui plan finally happened. Good for you, Rob." Maui. He had told me we couldn't afford Maui for our last anniversary. Said it wasn't the right time, that we needed to be conservative with our spending because of a potential reorg at Nova Health. We'd gone to Carmel instead. It had rained the whole weekend and we'd laughed about the room being too small and the wine too warm. I had believed him when he said that weekend still mattered. Now here he was sipping cocktails on a luxury deck in Lanai, a place I'd only dreamed of, with a woman who had once tried to undercut me at a national finance summit. I tried to remember the last time Rob and I had touched like that, kissed like that, looked at each other like that. I couldn't. The next 24 hours passed in a haze. I didn't answer calls. I didn't leave the house. I ignored an email from my director about a report due Monday. I barely ate. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications from Facebook, from friends commenting or liking the video, but no one messaged me directly. No one asked if I was okay. That silence hurt worse than the public betrayal. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, arms across my chest like I was trying to hold myself together. At some point, I opened my laptop and started looking at flights. I didn't know where I would go. I wasn't ready to confront Rob. I wasn't ready to cry. I just wanted to be anywhere but in that house. Around 3 a.m., I opened the video one last time. It was still up. Still public. Still tagged. This time I watched until the very end. Right before Rob signed off, Vanessa leaned into the camera and said something with a smirk, "To new beginnings." Rob clinked his drink against hers and smiled. My throat burned. I clicked off, closed the laptop, and sat in the dark for a long time listening to the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. My marriage hadn't ended in a fight. It hadn't ended in a therapist's office or a quiet conversation across a kitchen table. It ended in a Facebook live stream. And that might have been the most humiliating part of all. I didn't change clothes for 3 days. I didn't shower. I barely moved from the couch except to heat water for tea. I never finished or opened the blinds only to close them again 10 minutes later. Time blurred. The house felt like a museum of a life I no longer lived, and I was just the last tourist refusing to leave. On the second day, my phone rang and I picked it up without checking the screen, still half expecting to hear Rob's voice. It was Linda, my mother-in-law, though she never liked that word. "Jessica, I just saw something I can't unsee." I waited. "I mean, I'm sure this is complicated, but did you really have to make it so public?" I blinked. "Excuse me," she sighed, a tight little exhale that always came before the passive-aggressive jab. "I'm not saying this is your fault, but men don't just walk away from a marriage without reason. Maybe if you'd been a little more affectionate, more available." I hung up. It wasn't loud. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I just pressed the red button and set it down on the cushion beside me like it had never rung at all. No one else called. Not a single friend. No texts asking if I was okay. Only notifications from Facebook. Comments. Shares. Vanessa had posted another photo, this time from the beach. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a white swimsuit captioned, "Paradise is a mindset." I wanted to vomit. That night I stood in the bathroom staring at myself in the mirror. My hair was greasy and pulled back in a haphazard knot. There was a stain on the collar of my sweatshirt, something from a day ago or maybe 2. I didn't cry, I couldn't. I just kept looking, trying to find even a trace of the woman I had been a week ago. The doorbell rang the next morning. I didn't move. Maybe if I stayed still they'd go away. It rang again. Longer this time. Then a series of knocks. Quick, sharp, then a pause, then harder knocks. Then silence. I waited. Then one more ring. Relentless. I pushed off the blanket and walked barefoot across the hardwood floor. I wasn't expecting anyone. No packages, no neighbors I was close with. When I opened the door, a woman I'd never seen before was standing there holding a manila folder. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well in days, but her posture was straight and her eyes were locked onto mine like she'd rehearsed this moment. "Jessica Alden." "Yes, I'm Melanie Carter." I didn't say anything. She handed me the folder. That's everything. Bank records, email prints, screenshots, dates, transfers, even the spa bookings. I blinked. "I'm sorry." What? Melanie didn't flinch. "Rob is sleeping with Vanessa. And he's been using joint marital funds to pay for the whole thing. My husband has been helping them hide it." I stepped back. "Your husband?" She nodded once. "Mark Carter. He's Nova Health's internal auditor. Or was until last week. I found out about his affair with Vanessa 3 days ago. And I found out about Rob yesterday when I tracked the payment trail. Vanessa's name shows up in both. But you already knew about Rob, didn't you?" I swallowed hard. "I saw the live stream." Melanie nodded again like she'd expected that. She pulled a small notebook from her coat pocket and flipped it open. "I don't want an apology. I don't want sympathy. I want justice. And from what I can tell, you do too. So I'm here to propose we help each other." I hesitated, still standing barefoot in my doorway in pajamas that smelled like old tea and anxiety. "Can you come in?" I asked finally. She stepped inside. I closed the door behind her and led her to the kitchen. We sat at the table where I had once celebrated a promotion with Rob, where I had laughed over wine and burned frozen pizza and talked about starting a family. Melanie laid out the documents across the table like a crime board. Her handwriting was small and controlled. Each printout had notes in red pen. They've been seeing each other for at least 7 months. Vanessa met your husband through my husband. I guess they figured it was safer to use him as a buffer. Rob made the payments through a joint shell account labeled as a business development expense. Vanessa had Mark approve them. That's how it stayed off internal radar. My hands trembled as I picked up one of the statements. Rob had paid for a couple's massage in Honolulu. 2 days after telling me he was working late because of quarter-end reporting. I could feel something boiling inside me, slow but steady. Shame, betrayal, rage. And underneath all of it, this growing clarity. They didn't just cheat on us, I said slowly. They planned this. They coordinated it. Like a project. Exactly. Melanie leaned forward. We don't go to their companies. Not yet. We go to a lawyer. We build a case. If this goes to court, we want it clean, documented, airtight. I met her eyes. They were steel. There was no panic. No grief. Just focus. Why me? I asked. You could have done this on your own. She gave me a small, tired smile. Because women like us, we're not supposed to fight back. We're supposed to forgive quietly or fall apart. But I think we both know we're capable of more than that. I looked back down at the folder. At my name. At Rob's. At Vanessa's. I nodded. Just once. Then let's start. Melanie came back the next day with a laptop, 2 flash drives, and a binder thicker than a legal textbook. She set everything down on my dining table like it was a war room. I had cleaned the space earlier that morning, wiped down every surface, lit a candle. It was the first productive thing I had done in days, and it felt almost ceremonial. We started with the bank records. My eyes skimmed line after line of transaction history, most of them disguised as vague work expenses. But Melanie had already highlighted the key charges. 4 nights at the Malilani Resort in Lanai. First-class airfare to and from Honolulu. Charges at designer boutiques in Waikiki. Spa packages. Private boat charters. Restaurants where one course probably cost more than my entire week's grocery budget. And the total $124,672. Pulled from our joint 401 Kelvin rollover account over 6 months in increments just small enough to fly under the automatic notification radar. I leaned back in my chair. The printouts trembled in my hands. That account was supposed to be for our future, I said, barely recognizing my own voice. Our emergency fund. Our long-term plan. Melanie nodded without looking up. That's why he used it. No one expects you to check the thing meant for later. She opened her laptop and clicked through folders she had labeled with names and dates. When she reached one marked emails, Rob, Vanessa, she paused. This is the part you need to prepare for. I didn't say anything. She clicked open a PDF of an email chain between Rob and Vanessa. They used work accounts for most of it, which felt like either arrogance or carelessness. Vanessa wrote in blue font. Rob replied in gray. It looked like any normal exchange, except the content made my stomach turn. He had sent her pictures of the house. My house. Captioned with things like "won't miss this place" and "can't wait until it's sold." There was one email where Vanessa referred to me as the spreadsheet queen. Rob had replied, "What she lacks in passion, she compensates for in control. Still thinks routine is romantic." Another chain included a forwarded link to a marriage counseling website. I had sent it to Rob months earlier during one of our colder weeks. He had forwarded it to Vanessa with the line, "Look how desperate she's getting." Melanie scrolled wordlessly. One thread was simply titled "The Plan." In it, they mapped out a timeline. Rob would initiate a quiet separation, citing stress and incompatibility. Vanessa would claim she had ended things with Mark. They would relocate to a city with a Nova Health expansion office, probably Scottsdale or Austin. Sell the house. Liquidate shared assets. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the laptop. He planned this, I said. Melanie was quiet for a moment. He did. And he wasn't alone. I stood and walked to the sink. The candle I had lit earlier was flickering gently near the window. I stared at it, my hands gripping the counter. I didn't cry, that surprised me. I thought I would, but there was nothing left in me that resembled grief. It had curdled into something else. He didn't just fall out of love, he engineered my erasure. He budgeted it, scheduled it. When I turned back, Melanie was already pulling out a yellow legal pad. If we're going to court, she said, we start with intent. That email thread, the bank records, and that live stream. That's not just a personal betrayal. That's financial misconduct. Possibly fraud. Especially if his employer doesn't know about the expense accounts. You think they don't, she shook her head. If they knew, Vanessa would already be suspended. But internal audits take time. And they've been careful enough to make things look like authorized spending. I sat down again. So what's the play? We build a case. Civil court. Divorce and financial recovery. We file for full asset transparency. We get a forensic accountant. We subpoena communications if we need to. And if this hits federal guidelines, we escalate. White-collar investigators love this stuff. It sounded clinical. Procedural. It calmed something in me. What about the live stream? She smiled faintly. Already downloaded. Several versions, with timestamps and comments. Including the ones where he calls her my person and says, finally free. It's damning. I stared down at the legal pad. Melanie had already drawn arrows and boxes connecting each piece of evidence to a potential cause of action. Fraud. Emotional distress. Marital asset misappropriation. I suddenly saw Rob not as my husband but as a line item on a litigation chart. And Vanessa, I asked. If we can prove she knowingly benefited from misused funds, she's liable too. Melanie sat back and looked at me. The question is, how far do you want this to go? I paused. All the way. She nodded. Then we'll start with the lawyer tomorrow. That night after Melanie left, I stayed up late organizing my own files. I pulled old emails, receipts, tax documents. I rechecked the joint accounts. I started a spreadsheet, of course. But this one wasn't about budgeting or projections. This one was a war plan. I didn't feel broken anymore. I didn't feel small. I felt sharp. Focused. And that was new. The next morning Melanie called just after 7. Her voice was brisk but tired. She had a meeting with the attorney at 9 and asked if I could stay with Emily for a few hours. I said yes before she could even finish the sentence. Emily had always been a sweet, quiet child. The kind of girl who whispered to stuffed animals and traced patterns into fogged windows. When Melanie dropped her off, Emily clung to her mother's sleeve like it was the only real thing left in the world. Melanie crouched beside her. Just for a little while, okay, Miss Jessica's going to hang out with you. Maybe you two can draw or read one of your favorite books. Emily didn't respond. She kept her chin tucked into her collar and nodded without lifting her eyes. After Melanie left, we sat in silence for a while. I offered her breakfast, but she shook her head. I pulled out some coloring books and crayons, but she just stared at the cover. Eventually, she wandered down the hallway. I gave her space, assuming she was exploring. But after 10 minutes of quiet, I called her name and didn't hear anything back. I found her curled beneath the guest bed. Her little arms wrapped around her knees, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. I crouched down slowly. Hey, sweetheart, it's okay. Do you want to come out? She shook her head. I waited a moment, then asked softly, are you hiding from something? Her lips parted slightly. Her voice was a whisper so faint, I almost missed it. Is Rob coming back? It hit me like a brick. The way she said his name, not like a friend or a grown-up she trusted, but like a shadow that lived under her skin. No, honey. He's not coming back. Not here. You're safe. Are you sure? Yes, I promise. He's not allowed here. And even if he tried, I wouldn't let him near you. She blinked. Her lower lip trembled for a second, and then she crawled out slowly, almost like she didn't quite believe me but wanted to. I helped her up and brushed some dust from her sleeves. "Do you want to sit on the couch with me?" She nodded. We curled up under a blanket and I asked if she wanted to read. She nodded again, so I pulled one of my old childhood favorites from the shelf. The Velveteen Rabbit. My mom had given it to me when I was 6. It still had the same tiny doodle she drew on the inside cover. A rabbit with one bent ear. I read slowly, letting the rhythm of the words guide us. Emily rested her head on my shoulder halfway through. By the time I turned the last page, her breathing had evened out. She was asleep. I didn't move. I just sat there with her curled into my side, her tiny fingers still clutching the edge of the blanket. And something inside me shifted. I remembered being that small. I remembered hiding in closets during fights, pressing my palms against my ears. I remembered the sound of slammed doors and whispered insults that were never quite whispered enough. I remembered being told it wasn't that bad, that people fight sometimes, that adults get stressed. I remembered believing it. Emily didn't need more whispered explanations. She didn't need to be told that what she felt wasn't real. She needed quiet. She needed safety. She needed someone who wouldn't look away. I wasn't her mother. I wasn't trying to be. But in that moment, I realized that this fight I had entered wasn't just about reclaiming what Rob stole from me. It was about ensuring that girls like Emily didn't grow up thinking this was love. When Melanie returned a little before noon, she looked like she had been spun through a hurricane. Her eyes were red. Her blouse was rumpled. She paused when she saw us on the couch. Emily stirred and blinked up at her mom, then clutched my arm and whispered, "Can I stay a little longer?" Melanie gave me a look I couldn't quite name. Part relief, part sorrow, part something deeper. "I'll make some lunch," I said, gently sliding out from under the blanket. "You two can rest a bit." As I walked into the kitchen, I heard Melanie kneel beside the couch. "Did you have a good morning?" Emily nodded. Miss Jessica read me the bunny story. The one where he becomes real. Melanie's breath caught. "That's a special one." Emily sat up and asked, "Can we read it again later?" "Of course, honey." I opened the fridge and stared at the rows of neatly packed containers. I hadn't cooked in days. But suddenly I wanted to. I pulled out eggs and bread and cheese and began cracking and whisking, the smell of butter filling the air. Melanie came in a few minutes later. She leaned against the doorway. "Thank you. For everything." I didn't look up right away. "It's nothing. Number. It's not. Emily hasn't smiled in days. And you. She feels safe with you." I set the spatula down and finally looked at her. We both know what it's like to feel small. That's not going to happen to her. Melanie stepped forward and squeezed my arm. "She's lucky to have you, and so am I." We didn't talk about court that afternoon, or Rob, or Vanessa. We just ate grilled cheese and tomato soup while Emily giggled at a cartoon and made us guess what animal each voice belonged to. And for a few hours, the house felt like it belonged to something good again. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was a block of stone that seemed to repel sunlight. Everything about it felt cold, from the glass doors that hissed shut behind us to the polished floor that clicked beneath my shoes, like it belonged in a museum, not a place where people came to reclaim their lives. Melanie stood beside me, crisp in a navy dress and heels I knew had been pulled from the back of her closet. Her jaw was set, eyes forward. We had met with Chase Anderson, our attorney, twice before this. He was young, sharp, and had the kind of energy that made you believe he could outmaneuver anyone, even a man like Rob. We were here to file the civil suit. Misuse of marital assets, fraud, emotional distress. Rob had pulled over $120,000 from our shared retirement fund and funneled it into God knows what with Vanessa. We had the statements, the bank records, the email Melanie hacked into with all his vile messages, and the live stream video. The one where he stood at that ridiculous rooftop bar calling me a deadweight of burden, someone who never got it, while Vanessa laughed behind the camera. Chase had smiled tightly when we showed him the file. He didn't ask how we got the footage. He just said, "This will help." The clerk took our paperwork without looking up. Her nails were bright orange and chipped, and she flipped each page like she'd done this 1,000 times. Maybe she had. Maybe every woman in this city had walked into this courthouse to drag back something that was already theirs. Afterward, Chase walked us out to the plaza. The sun was too bright. Everything felt too loud. "This is just the start," he said, tucking the file back into his leather bag. "Rob will push back. His lawyer's reputation is dirty but aggressive. Don't be surprised if they try to spin a new narrative." "What kind of narrative?" I asked. He shrugged. "That you were emotionally unstable. That you emptied accounts first. That he was provoked." I wanted to laugh. The idea of me provoking Rob was like blaming a mirror for what it reflects. "Let them try," Melanie said quietly. That afternoon it began. Rob posted a carefully worded message on LinkedIn of all places about navigating complex personal transitions. Then came the op-ed on a minor business site. A puff piece about how he was recovering from a financially abusive relationship. He claimed I had emptied our shared account without notice and left him struggling to care for our investments. He was trying to control the story before it even reached court. Melanie paced the kitchen like a lawyer prepping for trial. She kept saying it was predictable. Classic manipulation. But I could feel the blood pounding behind my eyes. "He's lying to everyone," I said. "He's always lied," she replied. "This time he's just doing it publicly." Chase sent a short email. "Don't engage. We'll file a motion with the original video files and time-stamped metadata. I'm also preparing a freeze request for his assets." Within 24 hours, we submitted a full package. The video. The uncut version. Raw files. Metadata from Vanessa's stream platform which Melanie had somehow accessed. I didn't ask how. Chase told us he filed for an emergency order to freeze Rob's personal and business accounts until the investigation was complete. The motion went through faster than I expected. By Thursday, Rob's assets were locked. That's when the messages started. The first one came late that night. It was a simple email. No subject. Just a line of text. "You made a mistake." I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. The second came the next morning. A text from an unknown number. All lowercase. "Watch your step." I showed Melanie. She grabbed my phone, forwarded it to Chase, then started Googling how to file a cyber harassment complaint. I wasn't afraid. Not yet. But I was alert. My body hummed with a tight kind of readiness, the way I imagined a deer felt when it heard a branch crack behind it. That evening, I took out the trash and found a small envelope taped to the inside of my mailbox. No stamp. Just my name in slanted handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a printed screenshot of our wedding day photo. Rob and I smiling at the vineyard in Temecula, arms wrapped around each other, my eyes squinting from sunlight. Someone had scribbled over my face with red ink. Not slashed. Not angry. Just covered. I sat on the porch steps, the paper trembling in my hands. Melanie found me 10 minutes later. She didn't ask questions. Just looked at the photo, then walked back inside and returned with a plastic evidence bag. "He's trying to rattle you," she said. "It's working. We won't let it. Not now." The next day, Chase filed a restraining order request and flagged the incident for the court. He warned us Rob would likely play dumb or say someone else was responsible. But it was already documented. "You're doing the right thing," Chase told me over the phone. "Just don't back down." I thought I'd feel relief. I didn't. I felt the ground shifting again, like no matter how many steps I took forward, Rob found a way to drag something toxic into the air behind me. But I also knew this wasn't just my story anymore. I wasn't hiding under a bed. I wasn't swallowing the silence. I was walking straight into it. One cold stone hallway at a time. The email arrived on a Monday morning just after 8. It was short. One sentence, no greeting, no signature. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending internal review. I stared at it, rereading the line until the words blurred. My hand hovered over the mouse, unsure whether to forward it to Chase or just throw my laptop out the window. I called HR, but no one picked up. I tried Marcus, my director. Voicemail. The silence was louder than any answer. By 9, my employee badge was deactivated. I couldn't log into the secure server, couldn't access my portfolio reports. The security guard downstairs. Rick, someone who'd once given Emily a lollipop on Bring Your Kid to Work Day, didn't meet my eye when I buzzed in. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I just turned around and walked back to my car. By noon, the industry blogs had picked it up. Top financial strategist under investigation. Amid divorce scandal. One headline read. Another one paired my name with Rob's, twisting our legal filings into a public drama piece complete with a blurry photo of us at a charity gala from 2 years ago. They didn't mention Vanessa, of course not. She wasn't the one being punished. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel, an old colleague from Capital West who now consulted for the same National Finance Council I'd advised the past 4 years. I saw the article. Are you okay? Call me. I did. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice was sharp, not with worry but urgency. Jess, you need to know something. Vanessa's been making rounds. Talking to people at the board. She's framing it like you're spiraling, that you leaked confidential models out of revenge. What? She says she's helping clean up after you. That you were too close to the edge, emotionally compromised. And she's pitching herself as a replacement voice on the National Financial Resilience Initiative. You know, the one you drafted the framework for last spring. My stomach dropped. That proposal had taken 6 months to build. I'd presented it at the San Diego conference in 2021, outlining our strategy to balance private equity risk across infrastructure funds in underserved communities. I remembered standing on that stage dry-mouthed, watching analysts nod slowly as the numbers clicked into place. No one else had touched that model. No one but me. She's pushing your 2021 deck with her name on it, I asked. Rachel hesitated. I compared the document she sent to the summary from your old files. It's almost identical. Same framework, same impact maps. Just stripped of your watermark and rebranded under her boutique firm. I clenched the steering wheel so tightly I could feel the tendons in my wrist tighten. This wasn't about Rob anymore. This wasn't just infidelity. This was theft. Strategic. Calculated. A woman who had sat in my guest room, drunk my coffee, then gutted my reputation and took a piece of my career with her. Rachel's voice softened. I don't think the board fully understands yet, but people are cautious. The press makes them nervous. I can try to slow things down, but you need to act fast. Thanks, I whispered. That means a lot. When we hung up, I sat in the driveway for a long time. In my head, I tried to retrace the path of how it all began. The first time Rob came home late. The night he changed the password on our financial dashboard. The afternoon Vanessa asked if she could shadow me at the 2021 conference just to observe. I hadn't noticed it then. The way she'd watched my presentation. Not with admiration, but calculation. Like she was studying not just the data, but the delivery. The way I structured arguments, positioned policy as scalable. I'd welcomed her in. Trained her. Defended her when other women in the field rolled their eyes at her lack of credentials. And now I was watching her upload my work under her name to the very stage I'd built. I went inside. My laptop buzzed with new notifications. Another blog post. A Reddit thread speculating whether I was the next Elizabeth Holmes. Photos of me cropped from old interviews with captions that made my skin crawl. But I wasn't going to disappear. I opened a fresh document and started drafting a statement. Not just a defense, but a timeline. I listed every version of the financial model from inception, complete with file dates, change logs, and internal submission receipts. I dug up the keynote video from the San Diego conference where my name was printed across every opening slide. I pulled screenshots of Vanessa sitting in the audience, timestamped with her social media post from that day. Then I called Chase. She's not just interfering, I said. She's appropriating strategic IP. We need to notify the board, file cease and desist if necessary. He didn't even pause. Send me everything. Now. Melanie peeked into the room as I hung up. Her eyes flicked to my screen. Trouble. They're trying to erase me, I said quietly. Not just from my marriage, from my field. Melanie walked over, placing a mug of coffee next to me. Then make sure your name is the one they remember. The next morning I wore my gray blazer. The one I hadn't touched since the council summit in Chicago. I curled my hair, put on mascara, and walked into the legal meeting with Chase like I wasn't the woman trending for a scandal I didn't cause. Let them see me. Let them remember who the hell they underestimated. The phone rang just past 6 in the evening. I was in the kitchen with Melanie folding leftover pizza boxes and wiping down the counter. The number on the screen stopped me mid-motion. Rob. Not his lawyer. Not some mutual friend passing on messages. Just Rob. Calling me directly as if we were still married, as if I hadn't filed an injunction to freeze every account he hadn't already drained. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I picked up and said nothing. His voice came through thinner than I remembered. Hollow, like something had been scraped out of it. Jess. I lost my job. I didn't move. Didn't speak. My thumb hovered near the mute button. I'm serious. It happened yesterday. They said the optics were too risky. That my name was dragging the firm down. The partners didn't even look me in the eye. They just handed me a folder and said it was best I didn't return after lunch. He sounded stunned. Like he still hadn't caught up to the gravity of it. Like he thought the world might pause just because he was finally falling. I could hear faint sounds behind him. Maybe the hum of traffic. Maybe wind. But no voices, no Vanessa. I kept my tone even, and there was a pause. A strained inhale. I was hoping maybe you'd consider withdrawing the lawsuit. At least the financial misconduct part. I know things got messy. But if this stays on the record, I won't be able to work again. I flicked my eyes toward Melanie, who was already stepping into the room. She didn't speak. Just held up her phone, already recording. I tapped speaker and set mine down on the table. Rob kept going. Vanessa said she'd handle everything. She knew people. Said it would blow over. That I just had to hold steady until it passed, and now she's not answering. Her assistant says she's in Italy, some retreat for angel investors. I don't know if she's coming back, or if she ever meant to. He let out a dry, bitter laugh. The kind people make when they realize the punchline is themselves. It was never about you, was it? It was about the money. The image. She said she loved me, but the second things turned. He trailed off, waiting for sympathy. I tilted my head slightly and asked, "Are you done?" He stammered. "Jess, come on. You know I didn't mean for any of this to happen. We were just trying to grow fast, leverage what we had. You always said that was smart. Remember, I cut in calm but sharp. You forged my signature to authorize a business account I didn't approve. You funneled shared funds into private ventures registered in her name. And you left a paper trail sloppy enough for a first-year intern to follow." His voice cracked. "It was never supposed to blow up like this. I thought we were building something. You and me. Even after. You could have come with me, Jess. We could have started fresh." I let the silence grow. And then, without changing my tone, I said, "Thank you, Rob. You've just provided additional evidence supporting our claim. This call has been documented and will be submitted as part of discovery." "Wait, what?" His voice jumped an octave. "You were recording." I didn't answer. Melanie stepped closer, her face impassive. I leaned forward and said quietly, "This wasn't an accident. You weren't swept away. You made 100 small choices and every one of them told me who you are." The line went quiet. Then a soft, resigned, "You're really going to do this?" "You already did, Rob. I'm just making sure the truth is written in ink, not vapor." He hung up. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the low buzz of the fridge. Melanie pressed stop on her recording, saved it, then forwarded the file to both Chase and the case folder we kept backed up on encrypted cloud storage. She didn't say anything at first. Just walked to the sink and rinsed out her tea mug. I stood there watching the phone go dark again. It should have felt like a victory. Like the tides turning. But what I felt was something quieter. The soft groan of a structure collapsing under its own weight. The echo of marble cracking beneath polish. I picked up the phone and called Chase. He picked up on the second ring. "We have new material," I said. He called. He admitted Vanessa cut him loose, that she promised cover. He asked me to withdraw the case. It's all on tape. Good. I'll loop in the forensics team and prep the supplemental report. And Chase, yeah, make sure it gets to the judge before end of week. You got it. I hung up. Melanie was leaning against the counter, now arms crossed. She studied me for a beat, then asked, "You okay?" I nodded. I just never thought I'd hear him beg. She didn't smile. Just said, "That wasn't begging. That was bargaining with ashes." Later that night, I sat on the balcony wrapped in a thick sweater watching the sky turn deep indigo. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere far off I could hear a dog bark. A siren in the distance, then nothing. I opened my laptop and pulled up the documents. The timestamps, the tax forms. The timeline Rachel had helped me piece together. I highlighted every key moment. Every lie they'd told, every asset hidden. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. I was documenting a pattern. One that the court wouldn't be able to ignore. One that no PR firm could spin away. And I wasn't finished. Not yet. The clip went out at 7:45 on a Thursday morning. It was short, barely 2 minutes long, cleanly edited with timestamps and a clear voice. Rob's voice. Admitting to everything. And Melanie's phone screen recording the incoming call log, the duration, the context. By 8:15, we had confirmation that both the legal team at Nova Health and our attorneys had received the full uncut recording. By 8:30, the firm's head of communications sent out an internal memo stating the board had opened an ethics investigation. Vanessa Hallberg was to be placed on indefinite leave pending review. I didn't even have to refresh the press page. A financial blog had already picked it up by 10. Vanessa Hallberg and Robert Hayes, the once rising darlings of East Coast impact investment circles, were now under preliminary investigation for alleged fund manipulation. The article didn't mince words. It referenced their high-profile romantic partnership, their lavish Hawaii posts, and a suspicious uptick in withdrawals from shared community accounts. It even embedded a clip of Vanessa presenting a pitch deck with a watermark clearly designed by my consulting team from 2 years ago. The caption read, "Source documents suggest the pitch was lifted directly from an early 2021 strategy framework attributed to Jessica Langley, now a public financial whistleblower." I stared at the screen in silence. My name wasn't buried this time. It wasn't a footnote or a rumor. It was right there next to her, side by side in bold. Melanie slid a cup of coffee across the table. "You ready for the fallout? I already lived through the earthquake," I said. "This is just the dust settling." By lunchtime, the fallout wasn't just online. Nova Health announced a full audit, and within hours of that, Vanessa was officially terminated. Her statement came through one of those performative PR firms that think adding a watermark somehow makes denial sound credible. "I take these accusations seriously and will cooperate fully. I am confident my record will show no intentional wrongdoing." Melanie scoffed. If by no intentional wrongdoing she means documented fraud in 3 different fiscal years, then sure. Still, I knew better than to celebrate early. People like Vanessa didn't vanish. They pivoted, they rebranded. I'd seen it too many times. A press scandal, a sabbatical in Tulum, then a podcast about growth and redemption 6 months later. But this time it felt different. Because this time she wasn't the only one on record. Rob had tied himself to her decisions, to the cover-up. They'd built a house of cards and handed me the matchbook. That afternoon, a package arrived. Melanie handed it to me with a raised brow. "It's from Linda." I didn't move for a second. Then I peeled back the tape and found a small wooden box, the kind you'd expect to find letters in. Inside, neatly folded, was an old envelope. Handwritten. Addressed to Jessica Langley. There was no return address. No date. Just the careful script of someone who hadn't written in a long time. Under the envelope, a short note in Linda's handwriting. "He left this for you. Said if anything ever happened, if anyone ever hurt you, that I should give this to you and tell you what he told me. Protect her, like she's blood." I sat down slowly, hands cold against the paper. Inside the envelope was a letter. Not typed. Ink on heavy paper. From Andrew Langley. Rob's father. My former father-in-law. I read it once, then again. Every word a quiet echo of something I'd thought I'd lost. He wrote about the first time he saw me present a proposal at a family board meeting. About how I was the only one in the room who didn't look for applause. He wrote about how he knew Rob wasn't strong enough to hold what I carried but hoped that by loving me his son might rise anyway. And he wrote that if Rob ever failed to protect me he would. You've built your life with grace, Jessica. If they ever try to steal that light, don't let them. And don't let them convince you it was ever theirs to dim. My chest tightened. I hadn't known how much I needed those words until I read them. I folded the letter, carefully placed it back in the box, and closed the lid. Melanie sat across from me watching. She didn't ask what it said. She didn't need to. Some things speak for themselves. That evening another article dropped. 2 unnamed sources within Nova Health confirmed that the company was initiating clawback procedures. Vanessa's severance was frozen. Legal inquiries were underway to recover misallocated funds. And an anonymous contributor had submitted the original 2021 strategy document to 3 major publications, all timestamped, all tracked. They didn't name me again. They didn't have to. The tide had turned. And for once I wasn't bracing against it. I sat by the window staring out at the streetlights coming on. Cars moved like little constellations below. Somewhere far away I imagined Vanessa reading the headline. I imagined her scrolling through the comments, watching the platform she built to raise herself crack right underneath her. Melanie leaned against the doorway. Want to go for a walk? Not yet. I needed to sit a little longer. Let the quiet wrap around me. Let the pieces start to fall where they belonged. I wasn't naive enough to think this was the end. But for the first time in a long time I could feel the floor beneath me again. Solid, unshaken, and mine. We drove down to Cannon Beach on a Saturday morning, the kind of drive where the windows stay half open and the radio plays soft oldies just to fill the silence. Emily sat in the back seat with her favorite stuffed seal tucked under one arm and a paperback flipped open in her lap. She didn't say much during the drive. Neither did I. But it wasn't a heavy silence. It was the kind that let the air breathe. We walked along the shoreline, barefoot, waves brushing against our toes, her small hand reaching for mine every so often. The breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed, and the sky stretched out in every direction like a sigh let go. At one point she bent down to pick up a smooth white stone and slipped it into her pocket. When we found a quiet spot by the rocks, she laid out the blanket and asked if she could read to me. She chose a story about a girl who got lost in the woods but found her way out using only the stars and her memory. Her voice was steady, focused, as if the story belonged to her somehow. Later, as we sat watching a group of children fly kites nearby, Emily turned to me. Her eyes were bright but searching. Can I ask you something? Of course. She looked down at her hands, fingers brushing grains of sand from her jeans. If something happens, I mean if my mom is still gone, would it be okay if you were my second mom? I blinked. The tide crashed somewhere behind us. I didn't answer right away. I just reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I already am, sweetheart. Maybe not on paper, but here. I pointed to her chest. And here. I touched mine. She leaned into me, then no more words. Just warmth. Just quiet. By the time we got back to Portland that evening, Melanie was waiting in the kitchen with 2 glasses of ginger tea and a letter from the court. She handed it to me without speaking. I opened it slowly, the words blurring for a moment before they settled into shape. The court had granted me full legal custody of Emily. Effective immediately. Robert Hayes was to have no contact without a formal court request and supervised review. The language was clean, definitive. Melanie raised her glass. I tapped mine to hers. To peace, she said. To protection, I replied. I didn't cry. I thought maybe I would. I thought the release of it would demand tears. But all I felt was stillness. A quiet that came from knowing she would sleep safe tonight, that I didn't have to look over my shoulder anymore wondering if a call or a lawyer's letter might snatch it all away. The next morning I made pancakes shaped like stars. Emily added blueberries and insisted on making a wish before eating hers. I watched her smile without flinching. That used to be rare. Later that day the alerts started rolling in. Rob and Vanessa had been flagged in a new investigation. This time it was the IRS. An internal leak revealed that both were now under federal financial monitoring. The report cited irregular offshore accounts, inconsistencies in disclosed assets, and alleged funneling through ghost nonprofits. A red banner beneath the article read, "Public investigation pending." The photo attached was from that same Hawaii trip. Vanessa smiling in oversized sunglasses. Rob leaning in shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his arm around her waist. The kind of image they used to post with hashtags like power couple or legacy in progress. I stared at it for a while, not out of bitterness but out of disbelief. How far they had gone to chase an image. How much they'd risked for applause from strangers. My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Saw the article. I'm sorry it came to this. I really am. You didn't deserve any of it. I typed and erased 3 responses before settling on I'm just glad Emily's okay. Because that was the truth. The only thing that still mattered. Later that night, after brushing Emily's hair and turning on her nightlight, I sat on the edge of her bed while she adjusted her pillow. Do you think she'll ever come back? She asked quietly. Your mom, she nodded. I paused. I think sometimes people leave not because they don't love you, but because they don't know how to stay. She rolled onto her side, holding her seal close. I don't want her to hurt anymore. I know, I whispered. Neither do I. She fell asleep like that, arms curled tight around softness. And I sat there a while longer, watching the rise and fall of her breath. The night was quiet, no storm, no late-night calls. No panic in my chest. Just the sound of a child sleeping. And that for now was enough. The ballroom buzzed with the familiar hum of lanyards, clinking glasses, and investment jargon bouncing between suits and stilettos. The Women in Finance Summit was being held at the Rosewood in Boston this year, a venue far too elegant to host the ghosts I thought I had laid to rest. I hadn't planned to attend, but Melanie gently insisted. You need to be seen again, Jess. Not just by others, by yourself. I stood near the back, a flute of mineral water in hand, scanning the crowd like I used to before a pitch, confident but cautious. The panel was wrapping up on stage, a moderator thanking the speakers for their insights into ESG risk and cross-border deal-making. Applause swelled, polite but restrained. As people shuffled toward the networking tables, I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. I turned and saw Rachel Myers, former VP at Franklin Shale Partners, now heading one of the fastest-growing venture firms in Boston. She was wearing a sharp navy blazer and her signature pixie cut. Jessica Langston, she said, her voice half teasing, half reverent. Back from the shadows or just visiting? I smirked. Depends on who's asking. Rachel leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. You know Vanessa filed an ethics complaint against you last year. Claimed you disclosed internal assets during a pending acquisition. Tried to bury your reputation right before the awards announcement. I nodded slowly. I had suspected it but never had the proof. She timed it perfectly, I said. Rachel shook her head, lips pursed. Well, turns out she forged most of her filings at Nova Hill. She's under investigation by the state board and has been barred from practicing corporate advisory until further notice. I blinked. Wait. That's official, she nodded. Oh, it's official. Her LinkedIn went dark last week. A few of her old clients pulled out of pending deals. She burned too many bridges too fast. There was something coldly satisfying about hearing it. Not vengeance, not gloating. Just balance tipping back into place. Rachel wasn't done. Also, you might want to check the center table before you leave. I raised an eyebrow. Why? She gave a cryptic smile and walked off. Curious, I made my way toward the middle of the ballroom where a black velvet display board listed the new inductees into this year's Top 50 Women in Finance. My breath caught halfway up my chest. There it was. Jessica Langston. Row 8. Sandwiched between 2 hedge fund directors. The same list I had once been removed from due to a pending ethics review. The list Vanessa had stolen right out from under me with charm and lies. I stood there a long while, eyes on the gold-embossed lettering, until a young associate from Oakland walked over and asked if I'd like a photo in front of the display. I said yes. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was posing for something I didn't belong to. Later that evening, I sat alone in the lounge near the bar, watching the skyline flicker through the glass walls. Boston shimmered at night. A quiet confidence in its corners, the kind of city that didn't demand to be loved but earned it. A man in his late 40s approached salt and pepper hair and the kind of tailored confidence that usually came with a good law school and a better PR team. "Jessica Langston?" he asked. "Yes, Daniel Cross. We met briefly at the 2019 summit in Chicago. I'm with Morningside Capital now. I've been following your work since the Stratacore merger. What you did for their post-acquisition valuation was nothing short of surgical." I smiled politely. "Thank you." He sat across from me without waiting for permission and slid a folder onto the table. "We're opening a new strategic growth division. I've read your writing. I've watched how you handle crises, and I've seen who keeps trying to discredit you. Which, ironically, is the best evidence of how sharp you are." He tapped the folder. "We'd like you to come in as Director of Strategy. Flexible location. Full autonomy. I don't expect an answer tonight, but I want you to know we don't just want your resume. We want your mind." I placed a hand on the folder but didn't open it. "That's generous, Daniel. Truly." He stood adjusting his cufflinks. "Think about it, and congratulations, by the way. Your name got the loudest applause tonight." He disappeared into the hum of the crowd. I sat there, the folder still closed in front of me, the city gleaming through the glass behind it. I didn't rush to open it. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. For once, my future didn't feel like a race or a recovery. It just felt open. And calm. And mine. The lasagna was a little overbaked at the corners, and Emily had insisted on extra garlic bread, which meant Melanie was already joking about heartburn before we even sat down. But the laughter at our small kitchen table that night was the kind that rolled out slow and easy, unforced. The kind you don't notice until you realize how long it's been since it lived here. Emily had set the table herself using mismatched placemats and a vase of backyard daisies. She folded our napkins into what she claimed were swans but looked more like determined squirrels. None of us corrected her. After dinner, we lingered with strawberry ice cream melting into bowls. Emily reached for another spoonful, then paused, spoon midair. "I think I feel peaceful now," she said softly. Melanie looked up, eyes wide, then glanced at me. "You do," Emily nodded. "I don't dream about loud voices anymore. Or running. I feel like things are okay again." My throat tightened, but I kept my smile steady. "That's a beautiful thing, Em. Peace is a good place to live." After she went upstairs to finish a drawing she was working on, Melanie leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. "She's healing, Jess. Really healing." "I know." "And you?" I exhaled slowly, wiping a spot off the marble with a dish towel even though it wasn't there. "I think so. I'm not trying to win anymore. Not chasing anything, just walking." We didn't need to say it out loud, but we both knew that walking forward sometimes takes more courage than any sprint toward revenge ever did. A few days later, I read a headline in passing: former CEO Robert Whitmore denied clearance for government contract due to pending legal scrutiny. His accounts had been frozen for suspected tax discrepancies. The lawsuit from Genesis Health Systems was just one of 3 filings. His name had been quietly removed from several speaking events. HR executives in my network confirmed he had been blacklisted from at least 5 major firms. His email, once overflowing with endorsements and board invitations, had reportedly bounced when a recruiter tried to contact him. I didn't feel triumphant. Just tired. Then still. As for Vanessa, she disappeared from social media without so much as a cryptic farewell post. Her brand partnerships dropped off. A quiet settlement followed after dual lawsuits were filed by 2 separate medical tech startups, both accusing her of misrepresentation and data tampering. Word had it she fled to Costa Rica for a while, but the influencer circuit no longer whispered her name with awe. She had become a cautionary tale, not a headline. I never spoke to either of them again. One Saturday morning, I sat out in the garden, still in my robe, coffee cooling in my hand. The hydrangeas I planted in spring had finally bloomed soft lavender and blue clustered like secrets willing to speak now that no one was listening for gossip. Emily's laughter floated through the open window upstairs. Melanie was helping her organize school supplies. The sound drifted over the yard like music you didn't need to understand to feel. I closed my eyes and tilted my face toward the sun. No court order or viral takedown could have given me this. This was mine because I had stayed, I had endured. I had not broken. When I opened my eyes, a single butterfly fluttered past the rosemary bush and settled on the edge of the garden bed. It didn't stay long. It didn't have to. I didn't need vengeance anymore. I didn't need their apology or the world to see them fall. I had a child sleeping peacefully again. I had laughter in the kitchen and silence where there used to be screaming. I had new roots blooming soft and strong. I never set out to destroy them. I just kept walking until they couldn't follow. And if they looked for me now, all they'd find was a garden, a quiet house, and a woman not waiting for anyone to clap. I didn't get even. I got free. And that was something they could never livestream. If you've ever survived betrayal and come out stronger, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Make sure to subscribe for more real stories about justice, healing, and the quiet strength of women who rise.